Hello, I'm Anna Barker, and I'm sitting here in my new little studio space with a poster of Napoleon in the background because he seems to be a part of every narrative that we have been dealing with for the past few years, from all the French books that we read to, of course, Tolstoy's War and Peace, and to everything Dostoevsky has written, because Dostoevsky has a lot of theories about great men of history, and we'll be looking into those definitely when we're reading Notes from Underground and Crime and Punishment this fall. I already showed the readers this very strategically prepositioned crime and punishment scented candle. Industry just never ceases to surprise us with novelty items that we absolutely seem to need. So I have my Napoleon crossing the Alps, and I have my Napoleon bust in the background. I'm ready for Notes from Underground and Crime and Punishment. But today we're going to talk about Alexandre Dumas and Three Musketeers. And I started putting all of my books on the shelves. So this shelf right here is my Dumas shelf, and I have about 2 more boxes of him. So everything is in the process of assembly. And so, of course, Napoleon was a huge part of Alexandre Dumas' life. Because we talked about his father, and I can't recommend the biography of his dad that is entitled The Black Count enough, because his father was the son of a French aristocrat and a Haitian slave woman. And when the revolution happened, he abandoned his aristocratic background, and he fought for the revolution, and then on the side of Napoleon in Malta and Egypt, after he switched his name to the name of his Haitian slave woman mother, Marie Suzette Dumas. So Dumas was the name of this amazing matriarch of the 3 great Dumas in history: the general, the father of Alexandre Dumas, the writer of the Three Musketeers, and Alexandre Dumas, the son. So all of them were named a part of their name was always Alexander. So the father, the great revolutionary general, was Thomas Alexandre Dumas. The son who wrote the Three Musketeers, the Count of Monte Cristo, and about 80 other titles was Alexandre Dumas. And then his son, whose 200th birthday we celebrated together. That was an interesting impromptu weekend celebration. That was also Alexandre Dumas. And it's amazing. Some of you actually read The Lady of the Camellias, and then you were so psyched about The Lady of the Camellias that you read Manon Lescaut, which is the novel that is crucial for the understanding of the plot of The Lady of the Camellias. So French literature is boundlessly fascinating, and the connectivity is it's a thrill to people like me who are comparative literature people. So the father was amazing. The father of all of the Dumas, the Black Count, the Napoleonic general. He went with Napoleon, as I mentioned, to Malta and to Egypt, and the Egyptians actually had respect for Napoleon because he had a high-ranking Black general on his staff, and that really made the Egyptians feel that Napoleon perhaps someone that they can work with, because he has non-racial view of governance on his staff. Of course, the Egyptian campaign was a complete disaster, just a complete disaster, and Napoleon abandoned his army in Egypt, but of course he was a master of political propaganda. Just look at this painting: do you gallop across the Alps on a white steed in order to win the Battle of Marengo? Of course not. He was huddled up in a gray coat and crossed the Alps on a mule. But that's not what we want to believe. We want to believe the grand narrative. The grand narrative of Egypt was that Egyptology was discovered thanks to Alexandre Dumas, Thomas Alexandre Dumas, outing to Egypt. One of Napoleon's generals discovered the Rosetta Stone, which today is in the British Museum in London, and that was the inception of Egyptology. And then all of these Egyptian motifs ended up being incorporated into empire style. Like papyrus leaves and all of these fantastical Egyptian mythological creatures. I'm actually writing an article for my October column about the empire style, and I have the perfect title for my article: A Few Loose Thoughts on Empire Waste. So coming right up, it'll be so much fun. So I'll talk about to what extent the Egyptian campaign influenced the development of the empire style. But Thomas Alexandre Dumas' return from Egypt was catastrophic. He couldn't get a transport to cross the Mediterranean. Napoleon's fleet was, of course, destroyed by Horatio Nelson at the Battle of the Nile. And so Napoleon abandoned his army in Egypt. Many of them died, plague, wounds, horrific violence. And Alexandre Dumas' father finally crossed the Mediterranean, and he ended up in southern Italy, but he was taken prisoner and thrown in jail in the southern Italian town of Taranto, where the word tarantella comes from. Tarantella is the dance of a spider. And so it's a very, very fast, very exciting dance. That was the town where General Dumas was imprisoned. That imprisonment, of course, was the inspiration for the lengthy and meaningless imprisonment of the Count of Monte Cristo in the Count of Monte Cristo. And those of you who haven't read the novel, I'm not going to reveal any details, but we went through 100 days of the Count of Monte Cristo 2 years ago. So, and the Three Musketeers, of course, I mean, Porthos was absolutely inspired by Thomas Alexandre Dumas. He was large, he was tall, he was imposing, he was attractive, he loved to wear flashy clothes, everything that Porthos does in the Three Musketeers. So even though Alexandre Dumas was a very young boy when his father passed away, because the imprisonment in Toronto, not in Canada, in southern Italy, in Taranto, was very detrimental to his health. And so by the time he came back to France, he was a sick man, and he died when his son was very young. And it's amazing because the son was conceived after the father returned from this horrific escapade in Egypt. And so if he wouldn't have returned from that captivity, no Three Musketeers, no Count of Monte Cristo. It's amazing how fate works that way. But he returned to his lovely wife, and this tiny little boy was born, and the boy grew up without a father, but he grew up with tales of the father, and the tales of the father, this legendary father, the Black Count, the Black General of Napoleonic Army, of the Napoleonic Army, inspired so much of his writing. So, so that is the background for Alexandre Dumas. That's where Napoleon comes in, and eventually he moved to Paris. He started writing, just as many of the writers that we have been covering in my tutorials. He started as a journalist, and because this is the way to get an audience, and this is the way to train yourself to be a writer. It requires a great deal of discipline to keep churning out articles. You have a deadline, you have a continuous deadline, and you have an audience. Without a deadline and an audience, nobody would ever write a word, because it's such a terrific motivator. The greatest example of this is Dostoevsky. He was, I mean, his writer's diary is a work of journalism that was sort of continuously presented to his reading public and edited throughout his lifetime. So journalism, and then he starts writing tales of adventure. And in the 1830s and 1840s, France was ready for adventure. It's just an interesting period in French history. I mean, those of you who have been with me through all of the French novels, we've gone through so many of these incredibly complex geopolitical and geostrategic and ideological changes in France. In the 19th century, Napoleon is defeated at Waterloo in 1815, and after that, we have so many various governments that come and go. So I told you that Louis Philippe, during whose rule Alexandre Dumas is writing and publishing the Three Musketeers, was the most interesting king in French history. He was the child of the Orleans dynasty, the only one who ruled in that dynasty. And it's fascinating that our king in the Three Musketeers, Louis XIII, we still have no baby in that marriage, right? Anne of Austria seems to be just pining for Buckingham, who is sadly dead. And it's amazing how Alexandre Dumas weaves the historical facts that are true into the narrative of the Three Musketeers. So both the father of Louis XIII and the love interest of Anne of Austria, Duke of Buckingham, were murdered by religious fanatics. Not necessarily from the opposite side. So the Louis the 13th's father, Henry IV, was not known as a person who cultivated religious animosity. He was himself a Protestant. Remember, he was a Huguenot who converted to Catholicism in order to be the king of a majority Catholic country. And he was the one under whose auspices the Edict of Nantes was passed, which allowed for religious freedom for both Catholics and Protestants in France. But he was murdered by a religious fanatic. So was Duke of Buckingham, who was murdered by a religious fanatic, and also by an English officer who felt that he was not promoted for his service to England. So the complexities of this period and the political violence of this period, I underscored it when I published a list of all of the horrific political assassinations that were happening throughout the 17th century. And so we have this historical narrative that is very accurate. Duke of Buckingham was assassinated. But at the end of the novel, we are left with Louis XIII and Anne of Austria still childless. And I mentioned several times that the baby who is going to be born to them when they finally figure out how to have a baby will be, of course, the greatest French monarch of the Bourbon dynasty, and it will be Louis the 14th, the Sun King. It's fascinating because Anne of Austria sustained several pregnancies, but that ended in miscarriage. And one of them was actually terminated in the most ironic way. She was pregnant and she was running through the courtroom, the throne room, and she tripped on the throne and fell because she was just fooling around with her ladies in waiting. They were having fun. They were running, and she literally tripped on the throne because it was dark, and she fell and had a miscarriage. So it's like one of the most ironic miscarriages in history. The child who was supposed to be the worthy recipient of the throne was dethroned even before being born by a tripping over the throne. So this marriage is fraught with complexities, and eventually this child who will be born into this marriage, Louis XIV, will be described very differently by Alexandre Dumas in the second sequel to the Three Musketeers, because Dumas is writing the Three Musketeers. You probably noticed that Louis XIII is portrayed as an absolute buffoon, and this buffoonish portrayal of the king is not necessarily a reflection on Louis XIII, but a reflection on Dumas' attitude towards the monarchy, which produced the novel. So it's the monarchy of Louis Philippe of the Orleans line, and the two children who will be born, who will live into adulthood, to Louis XIII and Anne of Austria. The first child will be Louis and Louis XIV. The second child will be Philippe, Duke of Orleans. And so Louis Philippe of the Orleans dynasty, who will be the king of France during the writing of the Three Musketeers, has the names of the two sons of the king who is portrayed in the Three Musketeers. Louis Philippe, he came to the throne of France during a revolution of 1830, and he departed the throne of France during a revolution of 1848. So it's the only king in history who came to the throne was a revolution, and who departed the throne was a revolution. And by the time Dumas is writing the Three Musketeers in the early 1840s, he's extremely unpopular. In 1840, to boost his popularity, he negotiated with Queen Victoria of England and exhumed the body of Napoleon on St. Helena and brought him back with terrific pomp and circumstance to Paris, and had him buried at Invalides, where his body still remains. And then, so this is the time period of, if you think that politicians are craven today and they do all kinds of publicity stunts to improve their popularity without literally improving the lives of the people over whom they govern. We have not invented anything in the 20th century or the 21st century. Imagine this publicity stunt. Your popularity is in the dumps, and you just think of the greatest scheme imaginable. You will exhume the body of Napoleon, negotiate with the English, bring him home to Paris, and have him reburied with terrific pomp and circumstance. So that was in 1840. Dumas is writing the Three Musketeers in 1842, 1843, 1844. And the popularity did not improve. Louis Philippe is still very unpopular. So the terrific lack of connection between this monarch who was not meant to be, because the revolution of 1830 happened so that France would return to being a republic the way it was after the revolution of 1789. For a while. And Napoleon was sort of the ultimate representation of the abandonment of this republic. He not only became the first consul of the republic, just like the consuls of the Roman Republic before it became an empire, but in order to save France from constant attacks by monarchist powers of Europe, he proclaims himself emperor, because he just felt that if he is going to become an emperor, then perhaps these coalitions that the monarchist countries of Europe are constantly assembling against France would cease, and France would have breathing space for development. But it was not meant to be, and so he proclaims himself emperor. He had an actual vote to elect himself emperor. That was in May of 1804, and then in December of 1804, he becomes an emperor. And so all of these complexities are part of the narrative of the Three Musketeers. Even though it's set in the 17th century, the political discourse of the 19th century colors the way Dumas portrays the historical characters in the novel. And political violence is very much so a part of this period. I posted that amazing, extremely violent, but at the same time, gloriously heroic portrait of the death of the French journalist of the time of the French Revolution, Marat, who was assassinated by another French revolutionary, a moderate revolutionary, Charlotte Corday. And David paints a vision of this death as not a brutal and violent death, but a heroic death of a martyr who died for the people. He's seated in the bathtub, his body is slumped. He's very Christ-like, just emaciated and bleeding to death for this cause of the people. But the knife is very starkly portrayed right in front of the tub in which he is seated. So political violence is a part of the French everyday reality at the time when Dumas is writing the novel, and the unpopularity of Louis Philippe is coloring the portrayal of Louis XIII in the novel. So when we get to the sequel next summer, and I'm very excited about it because our summers belong to Alexandre Dumas. So I'm joking that we're spending 3 summers with the Three Musketeers. Now we have 4 Musketeers, and the joke is just not working anymore. but we definitely will be spending 3 summers with the Three Musketeers and the sequels. And we will finally get to Louis XIV, but in the first sequel, we'll get to the English Revolution. So we'll get to Oliver Cromwell and to the beheading of Charles I. I always tell my students when I teach this history that the French did not invent beheading kings. It was the English who beheaded their king in 1648. It's amazing because 1648 is the date of the Peace of Westphalia, and the moment where this all-European slaughter of 30 years war ends in 1648. And that's when the English, who seemingly come out unscathed out of this war, France remains Catholic, England remains Protestant, and Germany, which is the greatest geopolitical rival of both England and France, is completely destroyed. 30% of German speakers are killed in the course of this 30 years war. So you would think that England would say like, phew, we're done with that. We don't have to fear Germany anymore. It is so disunited. It's splintered into dozens of little countries. There'll be no unified Germany on the map of Europe between 1648 and 1870. So just stunning stretch of history where we have no Germany on the map. But the English have a revolution at that point, and they become a republic ruled by a dictator, Cromwell, and that will be a huge part of the plot of the first sequel. In the second sequel, we get to Louis XIV, the young Louis XIV, and it's fascinating that the second sequel will be written after the Revolution of 1848, and France is a republic again, and Alexandre Dumas, who is a believer in republics, just like Victor Hugo, will have a very positive portrayal of Louis XIV, precisely because he's writing at a time when the political climate in France is in cohesion with his political beliefs. So just a few little snippets of like, this is insider knowledge about the portrayal of historical figures in the Three Musketeers. It's fascinating. We have a beheading of a woman. I'm actually shocked how little shocked you were by the beheading of Milady. I read this novel before, and I was just horrified, absolutely horrified. I know how the novel ends, and it affected me just so deeply. I was horrified, and my mom was reading the novel. All of a sudden, like, this is our 14th tutorial, and my mom is finally catching on. It's like, I'm following along this time around. And so she was giving me this like brilliant commentary, and my mom has opinions, and she is not shy about sharing them. And she was saying, these men are absolutely horrible. I'm completely on Milady's side. I mean, she has read the novel like 5 times. And it's amazing, like, all of a sudden, my mom was becoming this feminist reader of the Three Musketeers. And she was just saying, these men are absolute pigs. So I just thought, whoa, mom, this is pretty out there coverage of the novel. But it's true. I mean, she is a superb character. I mean, like, we always talk about how these novels we read, they have to have a spectacular villain. And, the best villain, I mean, those of you who have been with me since like 2020, we read Paradise Lost, and Milton's Satan is unparalleled in world literature. He is, as that statement about Lord Byron, mad, bad, and dangerous to know. I mean, he would much rather rule in hell than serve in heaven. I mean, he's just so incredibly potent and powerful, and thrilled in his own ability to cause evil. And Milady is on that level of awesomeness as far as antagonists go in novels. I mean, her ability, she's just superb at making everything cohere in her direction. She's a perfect spy. I was actually, if I would have had time, because I ended the novel so fast because I had to get ready for, I'm teaching 4 classes this semester. So all of a sudden I'm like in over my head in class prep. But I would have loved to write a note on female spies, from women like Mata Hari to women like Harriet Tubman, to women like Josephine Baker. They were amazing. They were absolutely amazing, and they disguised their spy activity behind a very feminine facade. They knew how to use their femininity, and they knew how to use the invisibility of a woman in order to create a cover for their spy activities. And so maybe if I have a moment after I start the semester and it's still August, I'm going to write a note on women spies, because as far as spying goes, Milady is absolutely amazing. And yes, so beheading happens. It's amazing how often women were beheaded during that time period. I gave you the list of all of the English queens who were beheaded. It's paralyzing. 2 of the wives of Henry VIII were beheaded, and then the daughter of one of them, the daughter of Anne Boleyn, Elizabeth the First of England, beheads another queen. She keeps Mary Queen of Scots in prison for 18 years and finally beheads her. And she was fully conscious of the fact that she is beheading a queen. She herself is a queen, and she is beheading a queen. So just unimaginable level of violence. And you have to understand that these beheadings were always happening in public. I mean, D'Artagnan is the youngest, and he can't fathom beheading him. And Athos is the one who says, like, just you're young, you will recover from this. Because Athos, Aramis, and Porthos have seen the kind of violence that, I mean, they are probably all suffering from PTSD for the rest of their lives. War was brutal at that time. You killed people and you watched people die. And D'Artagnan is not jaded by that yet. He's young, he kills people. There's a lot of violence in this novel, but he cannot stomach the beheading of Milady. And then, of course, Alexandre Dumas is writing this novel in the aftermath of the beheading of a French queen. I am, for fun, listening to biography of Clemens von Metternich, who was the foreign minister of the Habsburgs during the Congress of Vienna, when the European borders were renegotiated at the end of the Napoleonic Wars. And it's fascinating that he was the Austrian ambassador to France at the time when Napoleon decided that he needs to choose a royal princess to marry. Josephine was older than Napoleon. She could not give him a child. When he became emperor and the ruler of continental Europe, he felt that in order to perpetuate this dynasty of the Bonapartes, he needs to have a son. And he actually was negotiating with the Russians. He wanted to marry one of the sisters of Alexander I. It's fascinating that the Ridley Scott film actually has a scene where Napoleon is talking to Alexander I and offering marriage to one of his sisters. It didn't work out. And remarkably, Napoleon ends up marrying the niece of Marie Antoinette. And so I always say, like, what was the point of this revolution thingy when the beheaded queen's niece becomes the next French ruler's wife? Not a queen, but an empress. Probably 30 pages of the book, and it's a thick book, about 900 pages, is dedicated to the complexities of the negotiations for both the French side and the Austrian side for the marriage contract and the decision for a French ruler to marry an Austrian princess. And a huge reason why eventually the Austrian princess was chosen to be the bride of Napoleon was the fate of Marie Antoinette. France literally felt like she wants to make it up to Austria for the beheading of Marie Antoinette by marrying an Austrian princess, and also Anne of Austria, who was the wife of Louis XIII. One of the characters in the novel was brought up as an example of how an Austrian princess was treated well by the French. So this history is just so fascinating and so endless. So the beheading of Marie Antoinette was such a huge shock to the French system that at the time of negotiations for Napoleon's second marriage, they chose an Austrian princess as a way of apologizing to Austria. And then, of course, I wrote my note on the opening of the Paris Olympics, where they still, I mean, it's still on their mind. The beheading of a woman is a terrible thing. And the Conciergerie, which is right on the river, and as the opening ceremony boats were passing the Conciergerie, the projection on the building was of countless Marie Antoinettes holding their own heads while red streamers were coming out of the building, because Marie Antoinette was imprisoned in that building before her beheading. So beheading women does terrible things to the psyche of a nation, and you can't recover from it. And that is a part of the narrative here too. Did you notice how I very cleverly managed to avoid talking about the main characters? And I just wanted to ask your opinions about the four guys. I sort of sense that we definitely came with like preconceived likings for certain musketeers. It's amazing that Athos, who is such a suave and complicated character, all that talk about St. Augustine and scriptures, he's so deceptive, and he has all these connections to ladies in waiting in exile. So he's a fascinatingly sly character. He doesn't get as many upvotes as someone like, well, Porthos is like, because he is so hilarious, and his whole his attempt to conceal the low rank of his mistress, whom he finally marries at the end of the novel. So we are wondering, like, Anna, how are we going to have a sequel? We lost two of the four musketeers, and it looks like Athos disappears at the end of the novel too. So Porthos is just hilarious. I mean, his courtship scenes are just so cleverly written. Alexandre Dumas is so clever with humor, irony. He's so subtle. He can be so hilarious. I love the way Blanchet, the servant of D'Artagnan, is chosen. He's standing on a bridge and spitting into the river, and that is considered to be such an act of intelligence. He's just watching the ripples of his spit on the surface of the water, and it's just such an amazing sign of his intelligence that he's asked to be he actually thinks that he is hired by Porthos to be Porthos's servant, but then he realizes that Porthos has mousqueton, and so he ends up being the servant of D'Artagnan, and they deserve each other. And it's amazing that he rises through the ranks. He becomes an officer by the end of the Three Musketeers. So I confess, I come to the novel always with preconceived notion. I really like Athos. He is a horrible character. He is an alcoholic. I mean, we have to admit it. He is drunk pretty much all the time. He has a lot of past terrors and crimes to conceal, and he can't live with them. I mean, he must have been very impressionable, innocent, naive, young man of aristocratic background, superb education, superb upbringing, wealth, who got burned. And the marriage to Milady was a catastrophe for him because he valued honor just about more than anything. For him, honor was paramount, and the fact that he was deceived into a marriage with a woman who was dishonorable was a catastrophe for him. I already, that I plan ahead with these things, and that we're reading a lot of Tolstoy in 2028 because he's going to be 200 that year. Well, Tolstoy has this horrific novella called The Kreutzer Sonata, where the husband admits to murdering his wife. In the very beginning of the novella, it happens so fast, and then we're sort of a captive audience along with his train compartment companion, who has to listen to the horrible tale of why he murdered his wife. And I was thinking of events that could coincide with the bicentennial of Tolstoy, and I was even thinking we can do like domestic violence conversation while talking about the Kreutzer Sonata, because it is so horrific. So there are tales out there of murderous husbands, but Athos cannot live with it. I mean, his reckless bravado and his courage is basically a death wish. He is the most Byronic of the characters in the novel. Those of you who read Byron with me a year ago, you know how much my heart belongs to Byron. So he's the most Byronic characters because he's so dark. He's dark. He's brooding. He's very. I mean, Byron has a character whose name is Manfred, who has this dark, brooding personality because of an unspeakable crime in the past. That definitely covers Athos. So those of us who are attracted to Athos, despite the fact that our rational self tells us that he is not a character that should be appealing to us, he is precisely so incredibly outsized in our perception because he is so very, very Byronic. And Manfred is the Byron character who was inspirational for Dumas. Of course, Dumas was a huge fan of Byron, and finding out more and more about how much he admired the English poet. And when Those of you who were reading the Charming Rotten Scoundrels books with me in the fall, last spring, you know that I like visited the place where Byron died on the day of his death. And Dumas, in his autobiography, relates how he entered the newspaper where he was writing, and he announced that Byron died. And one of his coworkers said, "Who's Byron?" Dumas never spoke to him again. So I absolutely love details like that. So that Dumas is a man after my own heart, because if somebody says, "Who's Byron?" I would be like, oh, you just don't understand. So yes, Athos is very Byronic character. And the swashbuckling nature of someone like D'Artagnan, we can see Byronic aspects in him too. He's more like Conrad in Byron's Corsair, or the very young Don Juan when he's just setting off on his many sexual adventures, and he gets into all of these situations. I mean, that's the whole point of of Byron taking the Don Giovanni myth of the man who seduces many women, or Don Juan, and he reverses it. instead of Don Juan or Don Giovanni going after women, it's women who are after him. And you definitely see that with several characters in French literature. Those of you who read The Red and the Black with me, with Julien Sorel, it's women who are after him, and it's very Byronic. And because he's so attractive, and women just can't keep their eyes off of him. It's the same with D'Artagnan. He's 19. He's very athletic. He's very cute. He's very honest. He blushes. Women definitely have an interest in him, and that is the Byronic aspect of a character like D'Artagnan. I have a question here, and the question is very long. Timeline at the end. Oh, he was already writing the sequel. He was writing the sequel at the same time as he was. So the question is, there's a sense that the novel ends, but there's no closure. And there's the sense that the novel will continue. He is writing the sequel as he's finishing the Three Musketeers. And it's amazing, somebody pointed out that the Richard Lester film, The Three Musketeers, there's a sequel called The Four Musketeers, and he was filming them simultaneously. Did you notice how The Three Musketeers is just sort of split? There's the diamond necklace affair, and then there are about, I don't know, 200 pages of just the characters kind of rattling about. Not much happens. We have sort of a desire to move on, but the characters are not moving on. They're looking for money, but they're not selling the diamond that the queen gives D'Artagnan. And there's just not much activity till we get to La Rochelle. And then all of a sudden, once we get to La Rochelle, and once Milady is dispatched to kill Buckingham and she's imprisoned, the psychological perverseness of those chapters is just so incredibly well done. I mean, Dumas all of a sudden surprises us. It stops being an adventure novel and becomes a psychological thriller, because her manipulative nature. I mean, Dostoevsky read Dumas. he really appreciated the psychological complexities of a character like Milady. And so it's funny because Richard Lester then creates a two-part version of the first novel of Three Musketeers, where part one ends with the end of the diamond necklace affair, and the Four Musketeers begins after the diamond affair and covers the La Rochelle section of the novel and the death of Milady. But Richard Lester did not tell the actors that he's making two movies. And so they were paid for one movie, and all of a sudden there was a second movie that came out. So the complexities, so Dumas' complexities about sort of ending a novel knowing that there's already a sequel coming to the novel is echoing in Richard Lester's splitting of the first novel into two and telling the actors that we're actually filming one film, but then of course releasing two. I just noticed there was one more question. Let's see, I'm the only person here now, so I'll have to read them Dumas was also writing. Yes, he was writing the Count of Monte Cristo at the same time. So yes, can you imagine writing the Count of Monte Cristo, the Three Musketeers, and the first sequel, basically at the same time? So 1844 was a good year. Yes, I feel like one of the Zoom participants has a stunned emoji face. Yes, yeah. 1844 was a really great year in French literature. I don't know how this is even possible, but you know, when the spirit moves you, then you're definitely writing. Dumas was accused of expropriating the work of other people. He had a lot of assistants, research assistants, but there were actually some novels that were published as Dumas novels, but they were written by others. They could not be sold as novels by someone else. But if the publisher just slapped Dumas' name on it, they sold instantaneously. So a lot of research is actually still happening to this day to see what is Dumas and what is not Dumas. But the Three Musketeers and the Count of Monte Cristo were the novels of 1844, and they are the most famous novels that he has ever written. He has a bunch of novels about the time period of just before the period of Louis XIII. So the period of Catherine de' Medici and her three sons, who all became kings of England and kings of France, and all of them died. I keep mentioning this story because it is just so completely bewildering how a non-royal Tuscan noblewoman becomes the queen of France, and then how she has all the sons necessary to perpetuate the line, but none of them stay on the throne long enough to leave an offspring. And so with her, this line dies out, and Dumas has three novels of that time period that maybe we should just, after we're done with Tolstoy in 2028, maybe we'll, since we cannot survive a summer without Alexandre Dumas, we can just, I mean, there's so many Dumas titles, but those novels are very, very thrilling. A lot of murder, a lot of mayhem, a lot of assassinations, a lot of very conniving women. Remember when Richelieu does not want to take the fortress of La Rochelle by force because he cannot bring France to the brink of the kind of religious violence that France experienced during the St. Bartholomew Night massacre. She is the queen who is associated with the St. Bartholomew Night massacre, where tens of thousands of French Protestants were murdered by French Catholics in the course of a few weeks. So Richelieu, knowing that in the previous generation, this level of political violence and religious violence happened in France, that's why the complexity of him building the double blockade of La Rochelle. The army is standing on, I mean, La Rochelle is right on the sea. There are two islands that the English were holding. So geographically, La Rochelle is a masterful location unless the enemy takes over the two islands. And so then you have to negotiate the space in between. And the blockade of La Rochelle was catastrophic, but still, Richelieu did not have to take it by force. He starved it out. And the tales, I mean, there are the tales of them eating their shoe leather. They were true. Shoe leather will keep you alive if there's nothing else to eat, and there was nothing else to eat. And actually, the first time we meet Cardinal Richelieu, when Monsieur Bonacieux is brought in for his first interrogation, on his desk, we see the fortification plans for the blockade, not from the land, but from the sea, so that there would be no resupplying of La Rochelle from the sea. And that is the fortification that I used as the main image for our tutorial. It was so masterfully constructed that he was called the new Alexander the Great because of his masterful taking of the city of Tyre, when he created a causeway to get to this island city and take it. Very strategic city, but Richelieu was named the new Alexander the Great. It must have been so nice to be so masterful, but it was his idea that he is going to starve the city out. He's not going to take the city. There'll be no murdering of French Protestants by French Catholics, he will just starve the city out because the St. Bartholomew massacre was still so present in the psyche of the French. He doesn't want to go there. Did you notice how that religious violence is constantly referenced in the novel? Do you remember the tennis game? I love the tennis game, the whole scene. And D'Artagnan is watching it, but he's worried that the ball will smack him in the face because he's about to meet the king, and he wants to preserve his very pretty face so that it would be intact and unbruised. But the cardinal's guardsmen start joking about his pretty face. It's like, what? You're so pretty. You don't want to have a tennis ball smash you in the face? And that's all the incentive D'Artagnan needs for all of a sudden go on a dueling rampage. So they start fighting, and then these guardsmen run into a house called or somebody's like when they talk about hotel in French literature, it's not a hotel. It's like the mansion that is fortified. It's the house of a French nobleman. So his servants come out, and then D'Artagnan calls all of his friends, and so there's another big to do, and they kill 3 more guardsmen, and the king is very, very pleased because killing guardsmen by his own musketeers gives him so much prestige because his personal army is better than the cardinal's personal army. But then he says, but a different and the house with whom they battle is a Protestant house. And so the king actually says, at a time of like uptick of religious hostilities, I wouldn't mind you killing them, but right now, can we just kind of keep the religious violence to a minimum? So you see that all these references to religious violence are just so present in this novel because all of Europe was a powder keg, and it was Catholics versus Protestants all the time for about 100 years. And the 30 Years' War was just, somebody said, and no computers. Yes, he was writing it with quill and ink. There was no ball point pens yet. It just, this is how you wrote these books. So yes, the religious violence was absolutely horrific. Reformation. There are so many ways to talk about Reformation. Of course, it's the birth of the vernacular languages, the translation of the Bible into the language of the people that read the holy document, the translation of the Bible into German or French or English or Italian. Vernacular Italian was a really big deal. And then the development of national literatures is facilitated by the fact that all of a sudden the Bible is available in the national language. But at the same time, it was accompanied by 100 years of terrific civil wars that were religion-based, and the kind of violence that is unimaginable. When people tell me that we're going through horrible times, I always say, like, have you heard about the 30 Years' War? That was a very, very unpleasant period in French and European history. And of course, during the 30 Years' War, when I several times I mentioned in my commentary that it was a war of constantly shifting alliances, the French, under Cardinal Richelieu's leadership, would often support German-speaking Protestants. So Catholic France would often support German-speaking Protestants as long as they fought against German-speaking Austrian Catholics, because geostrategically, Austria was France's biggest rival. Remember when I showed you the map of poor little France? Was the Habsburgs ruling, Austrian Habsburg family ruling every country all around France. So in so many ways, the religious conflict in Europe was used by France to its advantage to constantly stir up hostilities between Protestants and Catholics in German-speaking countries, because that meant that Germany and German-speaking countries were not united in their effort to battle France. So when we look at the Napoleonic period, and I always ask my students, which was the country that Napoleonic France fought most? Invariably, 100% of the time, they say Russia. And I said, no, it was Austria. Austria was, the Habsburg Empire was the biggest geopolitical threat to France for centuries. So when you look at a map of France in the 17th century, where we are in the Three Musketeers, Spain is ruled by the Habsburgs. Austria is ruled by the Habsburgs. And then if you look down at Italy, there will be no united Italy in Europe from the fall of the Roman Empire, like in the 4th, 5th century, till 1870. There's no Italy. And so who rules the various sections of Italy? Sicily and Naples meant the entirety of southern Italy. Sometimes that chunk was called the Kingdom of the Two Sicilies. That is ruled by the Habsburgs. And then northern Italy, like Milan, is also ruled by the Habsburgs. And then the Spanish Netherlands, that's Holland, Belgium, that is also ruled by Spain. And Spain is ruled by Austrian Habsburgs. So if you look at a map of France, Spanish Netherlands, Spain, Milan, Naples, Sicily, and then Austria and what is today Switzerland, and all of the German-speaking countries that are today Germany, all of that was the Habsburg domain, ruled by a Habsburg ruler whose name would be the Holy Roman Emperor. And so that is the Holy Roman Empire that was this loose confederation of elected emperors that lasted for 1,000 years just east of France. And so when France could cause discord between Protestant German speakers and Catholic German speakers to its own advantage, France would do that. And that's how France came on top, came out on top at the end of the 30 Years' War, precipitating the spectacular development of France in the late 17th and throughout the 18th century, where the French language became the lingua franca of the world, right? So by the time we get to the beginning of War and Peace, everyone is speaking French in Russia. They all eat French, drink French, dream French, read French, dress French. This France that we know as the cultural pinnacle of development in the late 17th and throughout the 18th centuries, the foundations of that France were laid during the period that it is described in the Three Musketeers, was France coming out united and not disjointed like the German-speaking lands at the end of the 30 Years' War in 16. 18 is my default date, in 1648. So in 1648, Peace of Westphalia, there's no Germany till 1870, and France becomes this giant of Europe. Very much so thanks to the policies of Cardinal Richelieu, who is really the big hero of this book. The one thing that pleased me so much, that so many of you anticipated Cardinal Richelieu to be the villain, because he invariably is portrayed so badly in all the film adaptations. But he is complicated. And so the complexity of Cardinal Richelieu, and how some of you actually learned to like him at the end of the novel, how Milady is jealous because Cardinal Richelieu is inadvertently showing that he appreciates D'Artagnan's uncanny, cunning abilities. And so the jealousy of Milady towards D'Artagnan is the jealousy of a woman who is bested at her own art, because D'Artagnan outwits her a couple of times. And so the revenge of Milady is definitely the revenge of a woman who is upset with Cardinal Richelieu for all of a sudden complimenting D'Artagnan on his ability to outwit her, outsmart her. So yes, a fun novel. Athos, the complex, Byronic, brooding, dark, morose, mysterious character. I'm still with him. But Cardinal Richelieu is my absolutely best new favorite, especially because I visited the town of Richelieu, which is almost halfway between the fortress of La Rochelle and Paris. And it's the town that he built. It's amazing. It's just, how Epcot was supposed to be like the perfect community of tomorrow, this new space age thing that is constructed in a very rational way to accommodate all of the most rational ideas of planning of the 20th century. That was Richelieu, France in the 17th century. He hired an architect to build a town that would complement his ancestral chateau, which he enlarged tremendously after he became the first minister of France. So August 12th, we celebrated Cardinal Richelieu becoming the first minister of France, 400th anniversary. And so his ancestral chateau, which was quite small, he expanded it. He made it absolutely spectacular. And to go with the chateau, he built a small town. Well, of course, revolutions were not kind to chateaus. So during the revolution of 1789, the chateau was destroyed, but the town is still there. And it's just perfection. It has a darling little square with two-story buildings that are just very elegant and very minimalist. And it has a church, it has a covered market, it has the square, it has a fountain, it has everything you want in a small French town. And everything is, and it has a wall around it, it has a moat, it used to have drawbridges. It is perfection, absolute perfection. The architect who created this town, experimental, perfect community of Richelieu's vision for him, later on designed Versailles. So when you say Versailles, you think of the chateau, but what is so much more thrilling about Versailles is the town itself where people live to serve as the chateau. The chateau is enormous. And, when the king in the Three Musketeers talks about going to Versailles, it was a hunting lodge at the time of Louis XIII. His son will be the one who will turn it into this vision of celestial perfection. What I love about Versailles is just walking through the town and now knowing that the town was designed by the same city planner who created the perfect community for Richelieu to complement his ancestral chateau just blows my mind. I mean, stuff like that just makes me so happy. And so Richelieu is my new big historical favorite. Can't recommend his biography. The one that I suggested you read at the very beginning when we started was The Three Musketeers. It is spectacular, absolutely, absolutely spectacular. And that that painting of himself with the cats, it's like, this has been the summer of people posting cats. And I thought like, I have the perfect cat image. It's like, it can't be beat. Cardinal Richelieu. I love how the cats and kittens are just sort of frolicking on top of a map. And then he has a very expensive looking silver plate tipped at an angle so that the milk would congregate at the lower part, which would facilitate easier access for the little kittens. I just absolutely love that painting. And it's a 19th century painting, but somebody in the 19th century thought, yes, we have to remember the great cat lover of the 17th century. And he would have like 10, 15 cats in Cardinal's Palace, just frolicking about. He was amused by them. So he had lots of cats, and he always had a mistress. Did you notice how Athos mentioned Marion Delorme, who was his neighbor in the Palais where he lived, and just mentioning one woman who was potentially the cardinal's mistress sent him packing. So yeah, you make enemies that way, but Athos was gutsy enough to mention that, and of course Victor Hugo wrote a play about her, which is amazing. Well, I hyperventilated again while waving my arms in front of a portrait of Napoleon and a candle dedicated to Crime and Punishment for another hour. Unless you have any other questions, I will quit right here. Sometime next week, this video will be edited and uploaded on our Three Musketeer page. And if I still have at some point a free second, I will write a little note about women spies. But if you're interested in just kind of like digging on your own, the three names that come to mind right away are Mata Hari, Josephine Baker, and Harriet Tubman. Amazing, amazing women. So it would be fun to write a paper about Milady as a very, very terrifying feminist role model. That would be such a fun paper to research and write. But her psychological ability to manipulate people, I mean, we don't have to like her, but we have to say, wow. I mean, the way she manipulates her jailer is an absolutely masterful act. Some of you were writing and saying, like, get on with it already. This is unbearable. Just it goes on for chapters and chapters and chapters. And I just wanted to say, no, slow down. This is psychological manipulation on such a superb expert level. I really want to enjoy this. And speaking of psychological manipulators, we are getting into Crime and Punishment, and we are going to have a couple of psychological manipulators in this book like no other. There will be an investigator, and I will not say his name, who will be a huge part of the psychological manipulation of Raskolnikov, and then there'll be another character who will be even creepier. And so if you love creepy psychological manipulation, then this next tutorial is just right for you. If you will feel like when you're reading Notes from Underground and you feel like you just want to shred that book, toss it, never read another book again. It's 100 pages that will really get to you. And I'm going to warn readers and tell them that what's coming up is just a book that will just get to you in such a personal way until you realize that it's getting to you because it's so honest about who we are. And so that's when you will just literally feel that you have this epiphany in your mind. And then you will say, like, good God, Dostoevsky, how do you know? How do you know everything about me? The stuff that I'm trying to conceal, the stuff that I'm hiding inside, the stuff that I do not ever want to show. How do you know that that's in me? It's because Dostoevsky observed human beings way too closely, and Dostoevsky definitely got to conclude a few thoroughly unpleasant things about us, and that's why we love him so much. So 4 years of Dostoevsky ahead, and those of you who have been following my my notes on Jókai Imre, the great Hungarian writer, we will read a couple of weird 19th century novels. So we'll do that, Dostoevsky in the fall, then Jókai Imre in the spring, then this first sequel to Three Musketeers in the summer, then lots more Dostoevsky. And I'm not going to tell you what we're doing in the spring of 26, because when I do, it will be very creative, very sneaky. So that announcement will come soon. Thank you so much. And I will just move to the Notes from Underground and Crime and Punishment page. I'm posting preliminary notes for now. I found all of my Dostoevsky biographical stuff from Brothers Karamazov, so I'm going to just repost that because those were very well written. I really approve of the work that I've done in 2021. So I don't have to do much heavy lifting. The biographical notes will be ready. I'll post probably 20, 30 of them, and then we'll be ready for Notes from Underground. All right, have a good weekend, and 3 cheers for Dostoevsky. All right, bye-bye.